Listening Section 3. In a moment, you are going to hear a conversation between three students, Wanda, Jack, and Annette. They are reviewing their lecture notes after hearing a lecture on the subject of bottle recycling. Before you listen, look at questions 23 to 32. Note the example that has been done for you. As you listen to the conversation, answer questions 23 to 32.
Hello, Wanda. Hello, Annette. I had trouble getting out of bed this morning, so I came to class a bit late. I got to the lecture theatre about 30 minutes after Professor Johnson began her lecture. Do you mind telling me what I missed?
Not at all, Jack. Actually, you didn't miss more than 15 minutes because Professor Johnson arrived a bit late herself.
Which is pretty typical for her, isn't it?
It sure is. Let's see. How do your notes begin, Jack?
Well, when I came in, she was talking about recycling of cans and the differences between can and bottle recycling.
Right, okay. Well, before that, she explained a little about glass bottle recycling. She said that glass recycling is still far more efficient than recycling other materials. That's because there's no loss of quality, no matter how many times the glass is recycled.
That's interesting.
She also talked about the tiny little pieces of glass you get when you break up bottles in the recycling process. What's that called again, Annette?
It's called cullet. It's spelt C-U-L-L-E-T.
Yes, that's right. The professor said that there are bottle factories in some parts of the world, like Japan and the US, that make their bottles entirely from cullet.
So they don't use new glass?
That's right.
What about bottle factories elsewhere?
Let me just check my notes. The bottles made in most places contain about 3/4 new glass and the rest is recycled.
I guess recycling is better for the environment than just throwing things away and using new materials all the time. But wouldn't it be even better to reuse the same bottles without breaking them up into cullet?
Yeah, Professor Johnson talked about that too. She said if you reuse bottles, you save on energy and resource costs. She said that in parts of Britain, beer bottles are still reused rather than recycled. But she said that reusable bottles have to be built stronger than the kinds of bottles that are recycled after they're used only once.
But then they last forever, don't they?
Actually, no. Reusable bottles can be cleaned and refilled a maximum of 30 times, and then they become too weak to use again. They're crushed and recycled.
But it still sounds better than just recycling. My parents tell me that when they were children, a lot more things came in reusable bottles and jars. It really seems like we've moved away from reusing, doesn't it? Did Professor Johnson talk about why that's so?
Well, she discussed why it's so difficult to maintain a system of returning and reusing bottles.
What reasons did she mention?
Well, a few things. One factor is that there's an increasing variety of bottle types on the market. You know, when you walk into a supermarket, you see virtually hundreds of different types of drinks, and each one has its own bottle shape and colour. In other words, there is virtually no standardisation. And standardisation is necessary to keep a bottle reusing system going. It gets too complicated and expensive to have a separate scheme for each bottle type.
That makes sense. So we're paying for the variety of bottles by having to recycle them rather than reuse them.
I guess that's right. But that's not the only problem. Apparently, shopkeepers are another obstacle. They don't want to have to collect all the returned bottles. Shopkeepers claim they can't afford the time it takes and that it's not their responsibility anyway.
I suppose I can see their point, in a way, but in terms of the environment, it's not a very caring attitude, is it?
No, but things may be changing. Professor Johnson said that governments are beginning to realise the need to cut down on wastes. So some places are making laws that require everyone to return their bottles for reuse. It's happening in Denmark and in parts of Canada. In those countries, a person who buys something in a bottle, like a soft drink, is responsible for returning the bottle once they've finished with it. If they don't, they're breaking the law. Also, bottle makers aren't allowed to make bottles that cannot be reused.
That's encouraging. Anything else?
Well, she then talked about plastic bottles. She said that it's still better environmentally to buy things packaged in glass bottles because recycling them is more efficient. But there are relatively recent programs for recycling plastics, and recycling plastics has its advantages.
Such as?
She said that recycling of plastics uses 1/10 the energy of creating new plastic.
Only 1/10 of the energy, did you say? Wow. So recycling plastics has its benefits too.
Finally, she said that we should also look at other factors about bottle use too, like transportation. Obviously, there's an environmental cost in transporting bottles to and from factories and shops. She said plastics are better than glass in this respect because they're lighter. For glass, 1 tonne is about 2,000 average bottles. For plastic, it's 10 times that. That's 20,000 bottles per tonne.
That's quite a difference, isn't it? Maybe plastic is the way to go, after all.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers.